A Sapphire Running Zone podcast.
Hi, this is Tim from the Sapphire Running Zone, and welcome to another of our Runner Stories podcasts. And we're pleased today to be joined by Chris in Chester, and we're going to talk today about the impact of stress and how running can help alleviate some of the challenges that we all face from stress. Life is never particularly straightforward, and Chris has had lots of challenges that he's dealt with amazingly well, and he's done some fantastic fundraising activity. We're going to rewind and talk about how it all began. So welcome, Chris, and tell us about your running journey.
Yeah, thanks for the invite, Tim. It's great to be here. So I suppose my background is as a lad born and brought up in St. Helens by parents who were teachers. My father was a very, very sporty individual himself, a very successful swimmer and rugby league coach. And I suppose running came first into my awareness when I went to grammar school and got thrown into the first cross-country race that everybody had to participate in. And in my pair of galoshes, of course, running 1 3/4 miles in the slippy, slidey mud of the winter of England, I sort of vanished up into the distance, never to be seen again, and was acknowledged to be fairly aerobically capable. And I was fortuitous at that point that the head of the German faculty at the grammar school was also a running coach for Liverpool Pembroke, and he took me under his wing. And I suppose through the next 3 years, from the age of 11 to 14, my capabilities started to blossom. And of course, like anybody in life, when you're good at something and you can recognize success, you become quite focused and you flourish. I suppose that's the background.
Right. Okay. So you ran consistently all through school, and then you went off to uni and carried on.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think the second part of school before uni was through the ages 16 to 18. I sort of won county championships and north of England, and started to get onto the radar of the national squad, both in cross country, road running, which was less profiled then in the late 70s into the 80s, and track. Though I was not a speedster, I was more of a distance guy, and so yeah, I progressed quite nicely through that period, through grammar school into university, but unfortunately had a fairly bad injury at the back end of my A-level year, which was quite debilitating, ankle and foot injury, which was poorly diagnosed and poorly rehabbed. And that was as much a fault of my own and my coach as anybody else, being complacent, thinking that we could just run it off. And really, we should have gone for a more serious diagnosis and a more intensive rehab experience, which we didn't do at the time, regretfully.
Yeah, and I think this is a common problem with a lot of people with their injuries. They do think they can just run them off, and sometimes, there are instances where if it's a slight knee niggle or something, a few days rest and you can be back on it fairly quickly. But yours obviously sounds like it wasn't that. So what happened then? You got the injury and you just basically kept plowing on.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Tim. And, at the age of sort of 17, 18, I was running 65 to 80 miles a week. And obviously the training regime and the science behind it in the late 70s and 80s is nothing like it is now. And it was quite clear now, looking back over time, that what I was doing was only compounding a bad injury with more miles and more stress into that leg and foot, which created quite bad scar tissue, some of which still exists today. Though I have, retrospectively done some very aggressive rehab over the last 18 months to recover it to a condition where I can actually run fairly effectively at my age.
Right. Okay. So when you went to uni, then what sort of level of running were you doing at that stage?
Yeah, well, nothing like as much as I would have liked. I was still very, emotionally invested into running because it had become quite a significant part of my sort of sporting and recreational life. But because I couldn't put the miles in that I wanted to, I sort of got somewhat distracted by golf and played university competitive golf for the 3 years I was there. But I still continued to run uh, with pain through university, but I was probably literally doing between 15 and 30 miles a week, just keeping, fitness levels at a base level. Met some good guys who were in the running club, and I used to limp along very inadequately with frustration. And the only serious thing I did was in my final year, I undertook a marathon just because they were doing it and I wanted to tick that box. Just as, in fact, prior to the London Marathon becoming, the icon globally that is today, because we're talking like 1983, 84 now.
Right. And which race was that, and what time did you do?
Yeah, so was it the inaugural Birmingham marathon through the city, and I did 2:52, which, considering there wasn't a lot of training under the belt, the whole diet and even the footwear were not anything like they are today. I was pleased to get under 3 for sure. Um, and yeah, I ticked the box, and to this day, I've now got 3 grown-up kids. The middle one has got my genes, and he still aspires to beat his dad's record. So yeah, he's got a goal in his life, and he's going to break it in time to come. And I look forward to seeing him do that.
Well, it's quite interesting that you did that kind of time. You were doing 15 to 30 miles a week, and you did that kind of time. It's quite interesting that clearly that's a result of your elite level running when you were younger. I mean, we did a session the other day with a guy who ran Belfast on about 4 weeks of training. He was an elite swimmer prior to that and had spent 20 years of elite training,
Yeah,
7 days a week, pounding out the miles in the pool,
yeah,
and virtually no running training. And he still did sub 4
yeah,
in Belfast on 4 weeks of training with a long run of about 10 miles. So
yeah.
it's very interesting to see the impact that elite level of running can have, even if you then just tone it down completely.
Yeah, 100%. I think my perspective of that, Tim, is two things really. I think one, it's the pure genetics that you're born with, for sure. That's an element of it. And then the second one is the amount of vested time you've done in endurance training. Let's just call it that. He's done it through swimming. You could have done it through cycling as much as running, or even really aggressive, hill walking, to be quite frank with you. And it's that vested period of time. I've seen it even with my son, with his performances in road races and marathons, where, he's 3 years, 4 years in now. And even though he's into his early 30s, he's getting quicker because he's got all that endurance, resilience in the tank. And I think that's very transportable from somebody who is an elite swimmer into another endurance distance thing based on conditioning and genetics.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Very interesting. So what happened next then? You did the marathon, and for a lot of people, obviously, it's a case of I've got the bug, or I never want to do this ever again. And where did you sit in? What camp did you sit in?
Yeah, well, I suppose I was in the camp of post university, and having done the marathon, I was in the camp of uh, frustratedly unable to continue to run because of because of the condition of the leg. And what I did was I just put it on the side shelf, not realizing that, and again, hindsight is that wondrous phrase, and it's a truism, isn't it? That what you don't realize is that whatever form of fitness that you undertake really does address two things. One, it gives you fitness, and it gives you mental wellness. And I think that word wellness actually is fundamentally important because it encapsulates all the elements of physical, emotional, and mental well-being. And what I then did is I undertook, my career initially in retail and then into technology. and marriage and a young family. And, the competitive genes that you have are transported from a sporting arena into a commercial arena. And though those attributes of competitiveness are still there and the good, the problematical element that I never anticipated that was building over time was when you can't release the adrenaline that's generated within your body through a physical activity, that adrenaline that sits with you when you're in a boardroom or a business meeting that is constant day by day, by week, by month, by year, builds up a level of toxicity in your body. And that is the most reflective element of danger that I've realized I was not addressing because I wasn't looking after myself in terms of a wellness context. I got wrapped up in work, I got wrapped up in family, and I de-invested in myself.
So when did you realize that you needed to do something about that?
Not too late actually. No, not too late, thankfully. So I got diagnosed with cancer. And we've jumped forwards now decades. The kids have grown up, the marriage has completed and finished, and we're now into around about 2017, 18. And I wasn't feeling great. And I went to the doctor. I got referred on to a consultant, and I had prostate cancer, stage 3, accelerating upwards into the amber alert, raising to red zone. And over that period of time, though I'd sort of still tinkered around sporting activity, I'd still played golf. I'd coached a local football team for 10 years because I liked the involvement, but I'd never done self-care and wellness management. And when I sat down with the consultant and they told me the situation, the sledgehammer of mortality hits you straight between the eyes. And it's a very sobering event. And you basically take yourself back to what are the fundamentals that are your personal building blocks of life. And, um, what do you need to do um, to redress the situation and make sure that you live a full and healthy life? So that was, that was a crossroads of my life for sure. At which point we then had conversations with the consultant regarding the different options I had in front of me, and chemotherapy and surgery was one of them. Radiotherapy was not an option because of other conditions I have physically that wouldn't allow radiotherapy to help, or active surveillance. And I just decided to take the positively aggressive approach of active surveillance, do a lifestyle change. Diet was always relatively good, but I quit drink. I changed my diet slightly, and I got much more into non-impactful aerobic physical exercise, which was primarily fixed bike, spin classes, high cardio, gym work, and started to turn a corner. Um, I think these things are distressing times, and one of my closest friends at the time had also been diagnosed with prostate cancer, and he passed after 9 months. So you realise at that point that there's a time to give back to society. I've lost another couple of colleagues very close and dear to my heart as well through cancer. And so we decided to set ourselves a goal. And I'm sorry.
No, it's all right. Don't worry. So what was the goal that you set yourself?
Well, so the backstory to the story is that my middle child, who's the one who's genetically like me, came to stay with me one weekend, and it was the day before his 26th birthday. And he'd started in corporate life, and he said to me, he said, "Hey, Dad, I've met this guy, and he's told me that every year of your life you need to celebrate your birthday with something meaningful." And I said, "That's a good idea, Jay. You're 26 tomorrow. What are you going to do?" And he said, "Well, I'm going to run a marathon." So I said, "Okay, that's a good idea. When are you going to do that?" And he said, "Well, I'm going to do it tomorrow." So he has my genes, and so without a lot of preparation, we planned a route and we carbohydrate loaded the night before, and he ran this marathon. And he died in the end in the last 3 miles, but he gritted his teeth and got through it. And that's the backstory. So I've got this cancer situation, and I've lost a couple of dear friends, and I'm about to hit the age of 60, and I'm very aware that there's a community of people who are vocational, who are unbelievable carers for the society of the old and the infirmed and the ill in the UK, that are unheralded for the work that they do. And I was about to turn 60. And so I thought, based on what Jacob had done at the age of 26, I needed to do something at the age of 60 and give something back. So I decided to do a 3-day challenge, having never really done any bike riding before. And on day one, I decided I was going to do 60 kilometers on my road bike in 2 hours, which I'd tried to do with a couple of Jacob's friends, and I couldn't get past about 52 kilometers without just dying on the bike. And then on the second day, I wanted to bike from Chester to Abersoch, which is 160 kilometers, over the top of Snowdon, which is 6,500 feet of climb. And then on day 3, do a half marathon across the Flint Peninsula from Abersoch to Morphinevin Beach. And I did all those. So I did the 60K in 2 hours around Peckforton Castle. I did the bike ride of 160K and the climb in 7.5 hours. And then I ran the half marathon in 2 hours 10 and raised £15,000, which was
Wow.
great.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Tell us how you trained and then how you fundraised that amount of money.
Yeah. So on the basis that, I wasn't going to be able to do this by hitting the road on the feet and do hard miles pounding the streets. It was all primarily on fixed bike, spin classes, high cardio, HIIT classes, and a fixed bike at home. I've got a Watt Bike Atom, and I use the Watt Bike training programs to do high intensity aerobic conditioning. To a point where, and I supported that by a colleague of mine who is an ex Commonwealth Games athlete, who's also a triathlete, and just did some planning around the conditioning for a 3-day event, and making sure that the half marathon was very doable with minimal amount of road work. And it goes back to your point around the person you'd interviewed from Belfast, who was an elite swimmer. It's absolutely nailed on that, that you could get somebody who's an elite cyclist and put them in a pair of running shoes, and they can do it, and the triathletes are like this, Alex Yee's the greatest example, having done the tri and then gone and run the London Marathon in, whatever it was, 2 hours 11. The genes are the genes, and then the endurance is there to support the gene capability. So the training was primarily fixed bike. By the time I actually started to do the running, and there was one guy who actually did all 3 days with me, who was 25 years old, and nobody else could do the 3 days with me. They just weren't able to. And on the third day, when we ran the half marathon in 2:10, I had to keep stopping for it. From a wellness perspective, in terms of forget the physical side of it, from a mental and emotional side, I was very tuned in, and I had a purpose. That's a really important part of it. I had a purpose because I was doing it not only for people who had passed, who were dear to my heart, but I was doing it because of the people in the communities that provide the services, in people who are on end of life or need desperate help because the way that they've been impacted by whatever injuries they have impact their family and the local communities around them. And that's a massive motivator.
So, how did you fundraise that amount of money?
Well, I mean, all the sort of standard and obvious things. I'm not a great social media person. I like to keep my personal life fairly private, but my business environment is through LinkedIn as a profile. Obviously, I've got a business network that's fairly invested over a period of 3 plus 4 decades. So you reach out through that multiplication of 1 to the power of n, and reach, your 5 to 25 key people who support you, and then they reach out to their communities. And then beyond that, I've got a daughter who's into digital marketing, who was working with me on my software business, and she spent quite a bit of time posting out as well through my training program, a little bit through Facebook, a lot through Instagram, and reaching out through local communities. um, yeah, and occasional postings of me in desperate stakes on a fixed bike, an hour and a half in with your body falling apart, but knowing that you're doing it for good reason. And I think those types of commitments that people don't see, because the hard stuff is done behind the scenes. Watching Mo Farah win the 10,000 meters at the London Olympics in 2012 is great celebration for us all, but they have no idea what went in behind the scenes to that success. And that's the same story for everybody.
Um, what impact did that challenge then have on your health condition?
uh, Immeasurable. I mean, that was probably on a personal level, because it wasn't about me doing it for personal gain. It was about me doing it for bigger picture things. But that was the big benefit, was that I came out of it not only feeling like I'd cathartically done something to provide support and for my friends that had passed and the communities that served them, but it allowed me to realize how important physical exercise was to my overall health and well-being, and has just spurred me on to continue, to make it an integral part of my lifestyle. And it makes me sit back now and think, how did I ever allow that to diminish in that
Yeah,
period?
I was going to ask you about that. How, because we started this by talking about stress, and I think we're all guilty, aren't we, of not really understanding how slow the sort of impact of stress can be. It's not something that suddenly gives you a whack and says, right, I'm here. It's a very subtle, gradual process that you're not able to deal with because you don't even know it's there, and almost until it's too late. So if you could, if you could rewind and have that period of your life again, what would you do differently?
I think, this is, it's all down to personal choice, and one of the things in my personality profile is I'm a giver, not a taker. And though that's a strength, it's also a weakness, I now realize, because what I did is I gave of myself and my time to my family, my choice, and I don't regret it, to my business, and all those other things. And what I never did is I never gave time to me, and that adage of self love, you can't be an effective person caring for others if you can't care for yourself first. And that's an immense learning. And so I used to think that that was a selfish act, not actually looking after yourself first. And actually, it's the best thing you can ever do, no doubt, because you can't function otherwise. And to your point regarding stress, you know, I talked earlier on in the conversation about adrenaline, and I think adrenaline that is not well harnessed by the body becomes the toxic agent that builds up the condition of stress over a long period of time. How that then manifests itself, as an outpouring in your body. I don't know how much that was a consequence that then became my diagnosis with cancer. I'll never know. But what I do know is that today, my condition of prostate cancer as a PSA reading is average for a male who's in his mid-40s. And that as a person, I have never, for my age, felt as physically and emotionally and mentally well as I am today. So do I regret the things that I've done? Well, you can't. Would I advise other people to do things better? For sure, because we all want people in society to live the best life that they can. And the reflection is that find a balance. It's too easy to throw yourself hook, line, and sinker into one thing and not have that balance of time on a 24-hour cycle where you give some time to yourself for your own well-being. That's the best advice I could ever give anybody.
So what are you going to do now going forward then? Is there another big challenge coming? Is there a marathon around the corner?
I'd like to think so. I'd love to do a marathon again for sure. I think my problem with the ankle and everything was part of my challenge. The subsequent thing, of course, with age is my knees were pretty bad, not catastrophically bad, but bad through primarily skin injuries. So medial cartilage, medial ligament tears, not too much arthritis. But from last September through to now, I've gone through an extensive rehab program, well planned out with physio, which has been fundamental. And if I'd have done that with my ankle and my foot when I was 18 and 19, we could be having a different story. But my rehab over the last 6, 7, 8 months has been fantastic. So my ability now to run and run not competitively, but effectively for age over distance is very doable. And I'd like to think that there's a marathon in there now, and I equally quite fancy getting a triathlon done.
No, I really, really appreciate that, Chris. That was very, very helpful. And I think, stress is being talked about more now than it used to be, clearly. Mental well-being, unfortunately, sometimes can be over trivialized, I think, by a lot of people. Mental health and mental well-being is clearly so important, but sometimes I don't think it's taken seriously enough because so much is being talked about that if there's ever a problem, it's my mental health. Whereas there is a serious underlying issue for a lot of people, and stress is obviously such a problem for so many people. And running and exercise generally can have such an important role to play, can't it? And your point about the adrenaline buildup when you've been used to a lot of activity is a very good one. So really appreciate your time coming on, and hopefully we can follow your next fitness challenge as it arrives.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks for the invite. Really enjoyed myself.
Thanks for listening to this Sapphire Running Zone podcast. Keep checking back as we have lots more podcasts coming soon.